sir. Do you mind if I take your name? Are you the moderator? Yes.
Kwame, please, tell them to come here. There is no time, please.
How you doing?
Good afternoon, all. Thanks for joining us in this press conference. Will you give us three minutes extra? It's 12:04. It's 12:04. Good afternoon, friends. Thanks for joining us in this press conference. This is a press conference jointly organized by Health of Mother Earth Foundation, Oil Change International Africa, Alliance of Non-Governmental Radical Youth, and Global Forest Coalition. I begin with going back to the colonial Africa, extractivism, mining, transferring resources from what we now call south to north. The mode of exploitation has not changed much, even in the post-colonial period. Oil and gas, massive inroads of monoculture plantations, energy plantations, and now we see carbon offset projects everywhere, protected areas, all impact communities, women, their life and livelihood. And now, when Africa's global carbon emission compared to the global carbon emission, Africa is less than 4%. And most of it is being contributed by oil and gas and other big polluters. But we are being told that Africa should reduce its emission. Africa has been compelled to protect their vulnerable people and communities and the impact of climate change without even contribution from the global north, who are responsible for this with any kind of support and finance. Africa is being literally starved of the finance that they require, since the debt servicing of the African countries is almost equal to $70 billion annually. So here comes carbon offsets as messiah to deliver climate finance. To produce woody biomass for bioenergy, and other dangerous distractions like bioenergy and carbon capture storage projects. While people and communities who suffered during colonization and colonialism are still left to suffer more under this brutal climate colonialism. In this situation, how does the fossil fuel, the so-called fossil fuel phase out unabated or abated and just transition look like in this continent? What are the likely impact on indigenous people, women, youth, and workers? Just to take a brief deep dive, we have an excellent panel here today to speak to you. In order of that, I'll invite first Thuli Makama, Director of Oil Change International Africa and member of Oilwatch Africa Steering Committee. It's over to you.
Thank you, and good morning, brothers and sisters. Thank you for coming to this press briefing. We are holding this conversation on the sidelines of COP, and a COP that is promising not to be different from the other COPs that we've seen in terms of outcome. And what is different this time, and I guess we've tried it in other COPs as well, is that we, the people, movements, indigenous peoples are here on the sidelines. We continue to show up. And that's significant considering that the COP for the past 2 years and seemingly even for next year is being hosted by petrostates. And that basically means constrained civic space, and also it means the agenda is even more challenging for not just our governments, but for us as well. We've seen how for the past 2 years we are being made to march and voice our protest inside the COP premises. We are not allowed to move beyond the COP premises. That on its own is telling on where we are at in terms of trying to, trying to deal with the climate crisis that we're in. This conversation this morning is significant because we are talking about something that, a trend that wants to reinforce itself over generations. And that trend is to make Africa, the global south, responsible for finding remedies and bearing, the burden of solutions for a crisis that we did not contribute in, and a crisis that we never benefited from. Instead, we have continued to host the negative impacts, the displacement, the loss of biodiversity, the erosion of social life as we know it in our communities, also that a few on this planet can continue to reap profits and live comfortably. So we see this trend repeating itself in how the solutions for the crisis are being sought from further displacement on our lands. We've come from an era where we have pushed back against an advent where plantations were being flouted as forests. And right now we hear a lot of messages around the planting of trees, on lands that are currently, the world wants to believe our lands are marginal lands, they are idle lands, but we know that those are not idle lands. They have significant use for us in our communities, for heritage purposes, and also for sustaining our lives as we know them. So we hear this planting of trees, absorbing of carbon by plantations that are going to be, planted in our communities. And we know that all this is just to delay and, distract us from dealing with the real solution to the climate crisis we're in. And that real solution really is dealing with the fossil fuels industry. Fossil fuels need to be phased out. Fossil fuels should not be allowed to expand. No new projects should be coming up. Fossil fuels, the only investment that fossil fuel industry and their governments should be doing is around cleaning up. Providing money for cleaning up the mess that they've caused in our communities, but also funding the transition to a cleaner, non-fossil fuel dependent future. And that is the only significant role that the current fossil fuel industry can play in life as we move on. And the reason we believe the fossil fuel industry and the northern governments are being mischievous and avoiding dealing with the real crisis and the real cause of the crisis, it's because we know that there is no lack of funding. There is lots of money, as we can see that the fossil fuel industry is actually projecting to invest billions into the expansion of fossil fuels before 2050. And we believe that those billions can actually be shifted and be redirected to financing the just transition. We reject the fear mongering that is being sent in our communities that says life will cease to be as we know it if fossil fuels are not allowed to expand, because our energy mix will not be able to carry us and our economies without fossil fuels. That's a lie that needs to be rejected totally. And also the lie that the transition or fossil fuel, the disappearance of fossil fuels in our economies will leave stranded workers and communities. We know that is a lie, because the transition brings so much opportunity for new jobs, both in terms of tech, new technology, and also the renewable industry itself brings lots of job opportunities. So we would like to make a distinct call that this COP should come up with a final statement that leads us to the phase out of fossil fuels, and phasing them out in a fast manner. It has to be fair as well. Phase out has to be fair, and also it has to be fully funded, because there is a lot of money that has been made from polluting the planet. So this COP has the challenge, deal with the fossil fuels, which is the elephant in the room, the monster that hasn't been named for quite a while, and then also deal with the issue of financing for the transition, redirect all the money that is being given to the fossil fuel industry into financing the transition, but also making sure that the fossil fuel industry and the supporting governments from the global north are paying their share of the loss and damage that we have suffered from the crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Thuli. So we are now over to Erika Njuguna from Alliance of Non-Governmental Radical Youth. Erika, floor.
Thank you. Africa is not only bearing the impacts of the climate crisis, but also the negative impacts of the so-called climate solutions like carbon markets. Large tracts of African lands are being bought out for carbon offset projects. International multilateral systems are failing us. The climate negotiation system has historically failed to deliver phase out of all fossil fuels, and just recently there was a veto at the UN Security Council. Global climate negotiations are still being held hostage by imperial powers, petrostates, and Africa and other global south countries are bearing the brunt of this unequal international system, delaying the unlocking of finance, resources, and technology necessary to power the just transition for Africa, and instead pushing false solutions like carbon offsets. The litmus test for whether COP28 will be successful or not is based on whether or not world leaders can commit to a fast, fair, funded, and equitable phase-out of all fossil fuels that starts with committing to stopping all new oil and gas exploration and phasing out existing production whilst massively investing in people-led renewable energy. In an effort to follow the same pathways of global north countries who have fossil fuel dependent economies, African oil is being exported to European countries while its communities are being kicked out of their own lands to make way for European elitist economic growth. African oil is not for African people. It has instead led to debt, health issues like cancers, and we must not follow the same pathway that global north countries have. We need a renewable energy-powered future for the 600 million Africans without access to electricity and further 800 million without access to clean cooking. The time is now to unlock these resources and support global south countries. We cannot lose this chance and instead lose it to weak language like CCS, which is not proven to remove emissions at scale, and lose this opportunity to limit a global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees. The window for action is closing, and we cannot afford to not achieve this commitment at COP28. This is an urgent, desperate call for action. Thank you.
Thank you, Erika. And we finally move over to Nnimmo Bassey, Health of Mother Earth Foundation. Over to you, Nnimmo.
Thank you so much, Anne. It's really very concerning that the COP is struggling, kicking and screaming about phasing out fossil fuels. At the last COP, it was the same struggle in extra time, and yet nothing came out of it. Today, the battle is about naming, clearly stating that we are not asking for abating of or unabated or abated fossil fuels. We're asking for fossil fuels to be kept in the ground. And the demand for fossil fuels to be kept in the ground is not just about the carbon molecules that are released into the atmosphere. It's okay to count how many carbons you have in the atmosphere, but we're also concerned about what happens at the site of extraction. Because we've seen communities totally displaced, communities totally poisoned. We've seen landscapes destroyed, forests destroyed at every stage of fossil fuel extraction, right from the prospecting stage, the seismic stage, the drilling stage, the pipeline stage, the transportation, and the use. So either any way you look at fossil fuels, apart from the tons of dollars it puts in the pockets of politicians and corporations, it brings harm to majority of those who live in territories that are unfortunate enough to have these fossil fuels. Once I was standing on a queue, and there were two oil company officials in front of me, unfortunately for me. And one said, I don't know why these resources are found in godforsaken places. And then I was about to jump in to comment. His friend said, no, those are not godforsaken places. We are the ones who make them godforsaken. And I was totally silenced because that was the appropriate thing to say. So the history of fossil fuels is not more than 200 years, but the world pretends that this civilization will last in perpetuity. Civilizations have come and gone, and the oil age, the petroleum age, the coal age has got to end. The challenge we have now is to get world leaders and to get oil to pay attention to the fact that we don't have to wait until the ultimate breakdown of everything. Now there's an option, and that is why the COP should invoke the Common but Differentiated Responsibilities Clause, which to us is the foundational justice idea in the whole convention. There has to be justice. Lives must be preserved. I mean, we know that life doesn't, it depends on whose life. Not every life appears to matter on the planet today, judging by the scale of destruction that we see all around us. But it's time for big polluters and politicians who work with them to know that we can't afford inaction. And inaction, of course, is bad action. And the idea of continuing with the extraction and utilization of fossil fuels and then pretending you can offset the carbon or absorb the carbon or capture the carbon is a very funny fictional idea that we all know is false. We can't keep on running the tap while we're pretending we're mopping the floor. We have to turn off the taps, and then we can begin the cleanup that is needed. We've got all the science. The science is not in doubt. If anybody was in doubt, the last emissions gap report of UNEP clearly stated that going by the current indices, the world is aiming for total incineration. We have to call it what it is. And with the big, even here in this COP, the big polluters, a country like the US is starting to speak the language of phasing out fossil fuel, but we don't know what kind of fossil fuel they're talking about. The US pumps about 20 million barrels of crude oil every single day, the biggest producer in the world, about 21% of global production. And so if the big taps can agree to shut down and help the smaller producers along the way to shut down, then we have a hope of handing over a planet that is livable for generations yet to come. But we are running the show now as though we are the last generation to occupy planet Earth. And this is why we can afford, politicians can afford, negotiators can afford to dilly-dally about taking real climate action. And I say big shame to them, big shame to the corporations. Imagine, just to round up, talking about fossil fuel, especially petroleum, oil and gas. There are about 29 million oil wells in the world that are waiting to be decommissioned. These are time bombs dotting the planet. No plan to decommission them. In my country, Nigeria, there are large numbers of oil fields that have been abandoned by Shell, by Chevron, by ExxonMobil, by Eni, and now they want to divest and move offshore where nobody sees what they're doing. You've destroyed the land, you want to destroy the sea. You've destroyed the atmosphere, you want to destroy everything. I believe that what we're seeing is not just a reign of crime. These are very sinful actions. And we call for keeping all the fossils in the ground to give our territories and communities an opportunity to breathe for once.
Thank you, Nnimmo. So, we are already talking about not only a fast, fair phasing out of fossil fuel, but keeping it on the ground. We are talking about a funded and equitable just transition. And perhaps should we add one thing more, divesting public finance from funding and supporting false solutions and dangerous distractions. So we have around 3 minutes to 4 minutes left for opening the floor. If any of you journalists present here, reporters, or anybody else have any questions for this panel, please go ahead.
There's a hand.
Yes, my name is Agnes, a journalist from Kenya. Now, my question is, the other day, the COP presidency was saying that at least they managed to talk to a number of countries and they were willing to phase out fossil fuels. And then a day or yesterday, I saw a list of a number of countries which had agreed, or rather had signed to phase out fossil fuels. So the number is very small. Do you think that the comments by the COP president was genuine, was when he said that the developed countries are willing to phase out fossil fuels?
Yeah.
All right, thank you for that question, Agnes. And, you know, politicians always like to play politics with climate change. And this is why they're backsliding all the time rather than moving forward. But, you know, the COP president has a responsibility to be the COP president and to drive the conversations in a way that will bring the best outcome, not just from this COP, but outcome to everyone, to the planet, and other beings that we share the planet with. And so what we could say is we're waiting for the text to come out. We've been waiting since morning. We've been waiting since yesterday. Now they keep on shifting the goalposts. Maybe they will push it to Friday. We don't know. So we're going to know. We're going to do something that will not take a lifetime. We're going to know soon. And I don't think we can speculate about what is going to happen.
Anybody else? We are almost here.
This question is for Nnimmo Bassey. Mr. Bassey, it's John Gambrell from the Associated Press. Good to see you again. We heard from Secretary General Guterres a little while ago, who suggested that there could be a two-track phase-out for fossil fuels, where richer countries could phase out first and then developing countries could phase down later. Is that something that would be acceptable, given sort of the disparities that we've seen from wealthier countries, or do we need to see just an across-the-board turn off the taps? Thank you.
It's an interesting context, but, you know, as I said, our concern is not just about the carbon in the atmosphere, it's about what happens in the oil fields. The people of Yasuni in Ecuador are about one of the very disadvantaged and in terms of economic means and everything else, but they voted to keep the oil in the ground. So it's not really about economics, it's not about whether somebody has been misdeveloped and others are trying to catch up. No, it's about the survival of the planet, and we believe that it is time for everyone to step into line to leave fossils in the ground. It could conceivably be said, of course, there has to be justice in it. I come from Africa. Most of the infrastructure and extraction in Africa is meant for export. It's not for the continent. So we have to, if we're talking about energy, let's talk about energy. If it's about opening new oil fields, new coal mine, new gas fields, all for export, and now about carbon trading, carbon offsetting, our lands are being bought, we have problems.
Thank you, Nnimmo. Thank you, Thuli and Erika.